Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take stacks of high-quality human studies, systematic reviews, and randomized controlled trials, and synthesize them into precise, actionable knowledge.
And our mission today is really focused on one of the great struggles of modern life.
Achieving lasting change. Not just starting something new, but actually making it stick.
Exactly. That initial enthusiasm to start a new health routine, exercise, diet, whatever, that's the easy part. Motivation is cheap, but persistence is expensive.
So today we're diving into the science to understand that neurological switch, the one that moves a behavior beyond just a short-term burst of motivation.
To creating something that sustains itself for years, even when life, gets messy.
So we're really making a distinction here between conscious behavior change and true effortless habit formation. We want to know what actually works for long-term maintenance, and we're only drawing from the highest confidence data available.
Precisely. And we have to clarify that fundamental difference right up front. Behavior change is driven entirely by conscious effort, intention, willpower.
Which is all happening in the prefrontal cortex, your executive planning center.
That's it. And that's cognitively draining. It's fragile under stress.
And when we talk about a true habit, what part of the brain takes over?
It's a neurological handoff to the basal ganglia. When a behavior becomes truly automatic, it moves from intentional thought to a context-cued impulse.
So the trigger becomes the environment, not your to-do list.
Exactly. The basal ganglia processes patterns, and it links a specific cue like a time of day or a location directly to an action. It completely bypasses conscious thought.
I like the analogy you used before we started.
Right. Willpower is what you need to start the car and, drive manually. Habit is the cruise control that sustains the speed without you even having to touch the pedal.
Okay, let's unpack this starting line, because this is where popular culture gets the timeline fundamentally wrong. We have to address the elephant in the room.
The infamous 21-day myth.
The 21-day myth.
We can say with very high certainty that the 21 days to form a habit claim is, well, it's just not supported by behavioral science.
So where did it come from?
It's anecdotal. It comes from a plastic surgeon back in the 1960s who just observed how long it took his patients to psychologically adjust to, say, cosmetic surgery or even the loss of a limb.
So it was about mental adjustment, not about cementing a daily action.
Exactly. It's a compelling, catchy number, but it's scientifically hollow.
So if 3 weeks is a pipe dream, what should you, the listener, really be expecting when you try to implement a new routine? What does the actual timeline look like?
The scientific data from large-scale research tracking thousands of participants robustly suggests that automaticity takes months, not weeks.
Months.
Yeah. A large systematic review found that the median time to reach habit automaticity was somewhere between 59 and 66 days. So you should plan for a commitment of at least 2 full months.
2 months is a serious commitment, but what really stands out in the source material for me is the massive individual variation. It wasn't 66 days for everyone.
No, and that variability is crucial to understand. While the median is 2 months, the range is. It's astounding. We saw some people form simple habits in as little as 18 days.
And maybe those are the people who started the 21-day rumor.
Maybe they are. But on the other end of the curve, some participants took as long as 335 days.
Nearly a full year.
A full year for a complex behavior to become fully automatic. Simple habits like drinking a glass of water after you wake up, they formed much faster than, say, a comprehensive 45-minute exercise routine.
That puts the role of patience into perspective. If you're the person who takes 335 days, you need a different level of resilience. So if repetition is the engine, what's the most critical ingredient for that neurological cementing?
It's repetition in a consistent context. That's the key. It's not just the number of times you do it, it's the consistent link between the repetition and a stable cue.
The location, the time, the action that comes right before it.
Exactly. The behavior becomes automatic when that context cue consistently and reliably triggers the action.
And speaking of resilience, that 335-day figure really underlines the need to reject another myth, the never miss a day or you'll break the chain mentality.
Oh, absolutely. That pursuit of perfection can be so counterproductive.
And the evidence supports that.
The evidence is clear and frankly encouraging here. Occasional lapses do not significantly derail the process as long as you resume the behavior promptly.
So missing a Tuesday workout doesn't reset the clock.
Not at all. It doesn't erase the automaticity you build over the previous 2 months. The goal is consistency over time, not 100% adherence. You should treat a lapse as just a blip, not a failure that means you have to start over.
That's a huge piece of knowledge. Okay, let's move past the formation phase and focus on what works for long-term persistence. What keeps the behavior running when motivation inevitably drops off a cliff?
Right, because it always does. Successful long-term adherence depends on mechanisms that function when that motivation wanes. And for exercise in particular, the data is grade A on this.
We have to distinguish between the habit of starting and the habit of doing.
Exactly. This is that fascinating distinction between the instigation habit and the execution habit.
So how big a difference does focusing on just the instigation make for someone trying to maintain an exercise routine?
An enormous difference. The instigation habit, that's the automated impulse to start the activity, like automatically putting on your running shoes when the alarm goes off. That is the strongest known predictor of long-term exercise frequency.
How strong are we talking?
Correlation studies show a really strong link, often reaching an R value of 0.67.
And for our listener, an R value of 0.67, that's massive in behavioral science. What does that practically mean?
It means that the instigation habit alone accounts for roughly 45% of the variability in whether someone keeps exercising long term. You are nearly twice as likely to maintain your routine if the start is automated. It's not about habitualizing the actual squat or the 10-mile run. It's about making the decision to start frictionless.
You minimize that mental hurdle of just getting going.
Exactly. And that emphasis on automation is why willpower is just such an unreliable long-term strategy.
It's a finite resource.
It's so finite. It's easily depleted by stress, fatigue, other decisions you have to make. And the evidence clearly shows that as habit strength grows, the influence of that initial motivation diminishes. The habit takes over.
Okay, let's pivot to dietary change. This is notoriously difficult, far more so than exercise for many people. What strategies in this domain show high confidence for lasting maintenance?
Dietary adherence has the lowest maintenance rate of all the health behaviors we looked at. I mean, the statistic is humbling. Only about 20% of people maintain significant weight loss, say 10% or more, after just 1 year.
And the traditional willpower-based diets just
They don't hold up.
they struggle immensely.
Probably.
But studies focused on small, simple, habit-based changes show a really different outcome.
Like the 10 top tips approach, what was the mechanism behind that framework's success? The 10TT approach, it moved away from restrictive rules and focused purely on embedding small, simple behaviors that were linked to daily cues. It recognized that consistency is the fuel, and simplicity makes consistency possible.
Can you give us a few examples so our listener can really visualize what those 10 top tips actually look like?
Sure, they included things like always take the stairs instead of the elevator, and you link that to the specific cue of seeing the elevator doors. Or another one was replace your usual evening snack with fruit or yogurt, linked to the cue of sitting down on the sofa after dinner.
So they aren't about massive calorie restriction. They're about these small, non-negotiable, context-cued actions.
Exactly. And the power of that simplicity was that randomized controlled trials showed this framework achieved sustained, clinically significant weight loss maintenance at a 24-month follow-up. It significantly outperformed traditional diets.
And there was a critical threshold mentioned in the sources.
Yes. Maintaining weight loss for a full 2 years drastically reduces the risk of subsequent regain by nearly 50%. It seems like 2 years is the point where those changes really truly cement.
2 years. That's the real goal, far beyond the 6-month mark where half of people drop out. What about other domains like medication adherence?
Medication adherence is a perfect demonstration of this cue linking power. We see really strong effect sizes for interventions that link taking your medication to an existing, reliable habit.
Like brushing your teeth?
Exactly. Taking the pill immediately after you brush your teeth in the morning. Those interventions show effect sizes more than double the approaches that just rely on calendar reminders or alarms.
And early adherence matters there too, right?
A lot. Being consistent in the first 120 days is a powerful predictor of successful adherence a year later.
Okay, let's move to sleep. We hear constant recommendations about sleep hygiene, but I get the sense that's another one that's often insufficient on its own.
That is a critical myth we need to put to rest. The clinical evidence states with high certainty that relying solely on isolated sleep hygiene advice, like avoiding screens or caffeine, is not an evidence-based strategy for chronic insomnia.
Why not? It seems so logical.
It often shows minimal effect because it doesn't address the learned associations that are driving the chronic sleep issues.
So if hygiene isn't enough, what is the strategy with the best evidence for long-term maintenance?
The strong long-term maintenance evidence lasting 12 to 24 months is really reserved for multi-component approaches. specifically cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, or CBTI.
And unlike hygiene, CBTI is a much more structured approach.
Right. It focuses on changing the underlying learned behaviors and cognitive patterns.
So for the listener, what are the core components of CBTI that make it so much more effective than just simple hygiene tips?
Well, the two core behavioral strategies are stimulus control and sleep restriction. Stimulus control works to break the association between the bed and being awake. So if you can't sleep, you actually get out of bed. You go to another room until you feel sleepy again.
And sleep restriction.
That limits the time you spend in bed to only the time you're actually sleeping, which consolidates and strengthens your natural drive for sleep. These are structured changes, not vague tips. They create new, reliable patterns and cues.
And what about those if-then plans we mentioned? Implementation intentions. Good for starting, but what about sustaining?
The moderate confidence conclusion is that they are excellent initiators, but they're poor sustainers. An if-then plan, if X happens, then I will do Y, is great for getting started.
But the effect wears off.
The studies show their effects diminish over time for complex, repeated behaviors. They help you get to the context cue, but the habit itself has to take over for the long haul.
Okay, we've covered what works. Now we have to spend some time on where the science is blind, starting with measurement.
Measurement is a major gap. So many of these habit studies rely on self-report measures surveys where people just report how automatic a behavior feels.
And we know people aren't always the most reliable reporters of their own behavior.
Not at all. We found that studies using objective measures like accelerometers for exercise or pharmacy refill data for medication, they often show smaller effect sizes. People tend to inflate their success.
Why do you that is?
Well, there's a desire to please the researcher, people genuinely misremember frequency, and there's a subconscious bias to believe we're more consistent than we are. When we rely on hard numbers, the success rate often shrinks.
Which leads us to a specific and I think glaring data gap concerning a huge demographic.
Absolutely. The evidence gap for women over 40, so the midlife and menopausal demographic, is striking. We have this high confidence in the 66-day median, but almost no research specifically tailored to this age and life stage.
So does the evidence suggest they can't form habits, or is this just a scientific blind spot?
It is a blind spot. There is no direct evidence they can't form habits, and successful trials have certainly included women in this age group. But we have to acknowledge that midlife women often face these unique consistency-disrupting barriers. Prioritizing caregiving for parents or children, which destabilizes routines. Physical restrictions like joint pain, fatigue, hot flashes.
All things that make a stable context very difficult to maintain.
Exactly. The core principles still apply, but the necessary context is often severely disrupted by these external factors that aren't accounted for in most studies.
And speaking of long-term tracking, how far does the science actually take us? Can we say a habit lasts a lifetime?
We can't. Truly long-term maintenance, especially beyond that 2-year mark, it's just not well documented. Most studies stop their follow-up at 6 to 12 months.
And habits are vulnerable.
They're resilient, but they are incredibly vulnerable to major life disruptions. A cross-country move, a new job with a different schedule, a major illness. Anything that removes the contextual cues entirely. Maintenance over a lifetime means you have to be able to reestablish the cue in a new environment.
This has been an incredibly precise look at what sustains human behavior. Let's synthesize the high-confidence takeaways for the listener.
Okay. Based on the strongest evidence, we can conclude 3 things. First, lasting habits require months, a median of 66 days, maybe much longer, of consistent repetition in a stable context. Second, for maintenance, you should focus your effort on the instigation habit. Make the act of starting automatic. That's the strongest predictor of long-term persistence.
And third,
small, simple changes are more sustainable than large, restrictive overhauls, especially in complex areas like diet.
Excellent. Now for the final thought. We spent this deep dive on the mechanics, the basal ganglia, the cues, but there's emerging evidence that the ultimate shift isn't mechanical, it's conceptual.
That's right. The emerging data, it's probably grade B evidence at this point, but it suggests the highest long-term persistence is achieved when the behavior shifts from something you do to something you are.
When the action integrates into your self-identity.
It becomes the ultimate internalized cue. It bypasses the need for conscious deliberation entirely.
So the ultimate habit isn't just changing the action, but changing the self-concept. The basal ganglia just automatically follows the identity you've adopted. It's the shift from thinking, I am trying to be a person who runs, to simply believing.
I am a runner. That identity becomes the most resilient context cue of all. So we know what works consistent repetition in a stable context, and we know what's unclear, what's driving that massive 18 to 335-day individual variation, and how to specifically tailor effective strategies for groups like women over 40.
Until next time, keep experimenting with your context and your self-concept.